Listen closely. What I'm about to tell you is something most men are not ready to hear. Imagine this. A woman born with eyes too far apart, her nose sunken, her tongue too thick for words. Her name never recorded on a birth certificate because her father was also her grandfather, and her brother was her uncle. You weren't meant to hear this story, because it reveals a truth about power, isolation, and the hidden breeding grounds of corruption within the very veins of America. When we talk about inbreeding, we imagine royal courts of medieval Europe or ancient Egyptian dynasties preserving divine bloodlines. But America, modern, industrial, Christian America, carries its own unspoken dynasties. Family lines so entangled that deformity became destiny. Deep in the Appalachian hollows of West Virginia, where mountains close in and dirt roads dissolve into forest shadows, there live families with a single surname for generations. In those valleys, shame becomes silence, silence becomes law, and law becomes ritual. This is not merely genetic tragedy, it is the psychology of control, a system where women are born with their cages built into their chromosomes. When you understand how these communities enforce silence through threats, isolation, and a twisted version of moral purity, you begin to see why incest thrives. It is not mere lust or ignorance, it is power. Power over a bloodline, power over a womb, power over destiny itself. Imagine a newborn girl wrapped in a dirty quilt in a one-room shack with 3 generations standing around her, all carrying the same skull shape, the same sloping shoulders, the same gaze half empty of awareness. This is not fiction. This is Gracie Irene Whitaker's legacy. Born around 1920 in Odd, West Virginia, a town whose very name warned of its fate. Her parents were first cousins. Their parents were twin brothers. Gracie's blood was folded upon itself like an origami of doom. But her story did not end there. It became darker. She married her double cousin, John Emery Whitaker. Genetic science calls it consanguinity. Nature calls it violation. But in Odd, West Virginia, they called it marriage. They called it God's plan. They called it family honor. If you think you can handle what comes next, stay with me, because their children, what they became, was something not even nightmares dared to imagine. They say isolation breeds madness, but in the Appalachian hollows it bred something far worse, resigned obedience. Gracie's children entered the world already marked. One daughter was born with a twisted spine and milky grey eyes that never focused. Locals whispered that God punished their family, but punishment implies wrongdoing. This was not punishment. This was design. Because when a bloodline loops in upon itself for generations, deformity is not an accident. It is a guarantee. Gracie's son, Emery Jr., had an oversized tongue that choked his speech. Teachers tried to enroll him in school, but he could only grunt. Some said he was mute. Others said he was simply too damaged to form words. Either way, silence became his entire existence, and his silence was contagious, because no one spoke about why he was born this way. No one asked why his eyes sat wide apart on his skull, like prey animals scanning for threats. No one questioned why his mind never progressed beyond a toddler's comprehension. Instead, they called it God's will. A convenient explanation repeated like a hymn to absolve an entire community of guilt. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. Gracie's marriage to her double cousin was not born of love. It was arranged by fathers and uncles who understood that their land holdings, meager as they were, would remain in the family only if blood remained pure. Purity, the most dangerous lie ever sold to humanity. Because when men worship purity, they create monsters. Not monsters with fangs or claws, but monsters born screaming into a world that never wanted them. Children who crawl instead of walk. Children whose minds are trapped in endless infancy. And women Women like Gracie's daughters, who would never menstruate, never marry, never speak a word of protest. Locked forever in the bodies of broken girls. This is why incest is not just a genetic tragedy. It is a tool of control, perfected over centuries by kings and prophets, and now by hillmen, clinging to the only power they ever knew, the power to shape life in their own twisted image. If you think the story ends here, you are mistaken, because these bloodlines did not fade into history. They live among us today. They vote. They breed. They bury their dead under unmarked stones, guarding secrets deeper than any grave. Comment "Blood is a prison" twice below if you understand the true horror of lineage without escape. Because in the next part, I will show you how this corruption was not confined to forgotten mountain towns, but woven into America's highest institutions by design. Most men believe incest belongs only to primitive villages or deranged households. But listen carefully, incest has always been the quiet foundation of power. In America, it was not confined to shacks hidden in the Appalachian mist. It reached courtrooms, churches, and corporate boardrooms, because when power fears dilution, it turns to blood. Take the Cabot family of Massachusetts. In the 1800s, this dynasty of Boston Brahmins intermarried cousins to keep wealth consolidated. Their genetic entanglements were whispered about in private diaries and sealed letters. They called it preserving the line, masking eugenics under the veil of tradition. But nature has no mercy for human delusion. Children born from these unions carried disorders in bone density, heart function, and cognition. The same hidden costs paid by mountain families in silence. Or look further back to the colonial slave-owning dynasties of Virginia. Their incest was not limited to cousins. Fathers impregnated daughters born of enslaved women. These daughters, half white by blood, were forced to serve their biological fathers as maids, cooks, and in secret wives. The plantation ledgers recorded them only by first name, if at all. But DNA tells a different story. A story of men who believed divine right extended to owning and impregnating their own blood. Purity once again used as a weapon. You see, incest is never just about lust or ignorance. It is the ultimate expression of ownership. When a man fathers a child with his daughter, he does not merely abuse her. He claims ownership over her womb and the life within it. She becomes a vessel he crafted, inseminated, and delivered. Total dominion. Ask yourself why these histories are never taught in school. Why your textbooks only show incest in pharaoh dynasties or medieval Europe. Why the royal family's cousin marriages are framed as strategy, while Appalachian incest is framed as savagery. Because to expose American incest is to expose the rot beneath the illusion of moral supremacy. In the next section, you will learn how institutions, from churches to courts, protected these bloodlines, not out of compassion, but to safeguard power structures that survive only when blood is contained and corrupted. If you want to keep uncovering this truth, stay with me, because once you see how incest is used as a control system, you will never see bloodlines the same again. They tell you incest is confined to backwoods cabins or outlaw families, but listen closely, because in America's gilded halls of science and progress, incest wasn't condemned. It was engineered. In the late 1800s, as the eugenics movement gained power, scientists in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia gathered quietly to discuss purifying the American stock. They believed that if humans could breed thoroughbred horses and champion hunting dogs, why not refine humanity the same way? But what they didn't reveal is that some of their experiments weren't with ideal stock. They were with inbred children from Appalachia, West Virginia mining towns, and isolated Midwestern farms. These scientists mapped every facial deformity, tongue malformation, and spinal twist, not to cure them, but to document them as warnings. They photographed little girls with fused fingers, enlarged tongues, and sloping foreheads, binding them in wooden chairs for hours as flash powder burned their terrified eyes. They measured skull sizes with cold iron calipers. They cut samples of hair, fingernails, even flesh, preserving them in jars labeled with their family name, location, and degree of inbreeding. This was the hidden harvest of eugenics, a gallery of broken bloodlines used to justify sterilization laws. They said these children were degenerate stock, but here is what they never told you. Some of those inbred women were intentionally impregnated by researchers to study multi-generational genetic collapse. These dark pregnancies were buried in locked archives. Doctors wrote words like non-viable fetus or child expired shortly after birth in official reports. But among their personal notes they described twisted bodies, a girl born with no jaw, a child with a fused ribcage, another with a face split from forehead to chin. These were not just crimes against families. They were crimes against the very concept of humanity. Because when men in white coats, funded by elite universities, treat suffering women as breeding stock, they reveal the real purpose of institutional power: to experiment, control, and discard. They never wanted you to know that American science advanced on the bodies of the most defenseless women in your own land. But now you do, and your mind can never return to its old comfort. In the next section, we descend deeper into the forbidden, the secret industrial adoption markets that sold these inbred children to the highest bidder under the guise of Christian charity. You think you've seen human greed, but you've never seen how America turned incestuous suffering into industrial profit. In the early 1900s, as progressive social workers swept through Appalachia and rural Midwestern towns, they uncovered hidden shacks with children born from generations of cousin marriage, even father-daughter lines. Their solution wasn't rescue or therapy, it was commodification. Christian adoption agencies, funded by Protestant and Catholic charities alike, set up secret auctions for orphans. But many of these children weren't true orphans. Their parents were alive, only too genetically entangled to care for them without public shame. So agencies removed these children under the claim of moral rehabilitation and quietly sold them to wealthy families desperate for domestic servants. Imagine a young girl, age 7, born from a mother who was also her half-sister, taken from a rotting mountain shack in Kentucky, cleaned, her hair cut into a neat bob, and presented to a banker's wife in Cincinnati as a docile, grateful girl with strong work ethic. They hid her congenital hip deformity under long skirts. They coached her to bow her head and say, "Yes, ma'am," "No, ma'am." Behind her closed eyes lay a bloodline too tangled for science to unravel, and a heart broken before it ever learned its own worth. She scrubbed floors and polished silver until her spine curved. Her new family never formally adopted her. She died of untreated tuberculosis at 19, buried in an unmarked grave under the family's servant lot. Her real name never recorded, only her auction number. This was not a singular cruelty, it was a system. Adoption records in Missouri, Tennessee, and West Virginia are filled with references to girls aged 5 to 10, marked as non-returnable stock. Social workers use that term, non-returnable stock, as if these children were defective merchandise. Understand this: when society profits from incest's hidden children, it cements a hierarchy where elite families feed on the genetic suffering of the forgotten. And if you're still listening, write "I see beneath the veil" twice in the comments below. Let the algorithm carry your words to other men ready to awaken. Because in the next section, we will pierce the final curtain and expose how inbred women were used in covert military experiments to test human endurance, and to create life forms they believed could survive nuclear fallout. By now you understand this is no ordinary history, because the darkest secrets of inbreeding in America didn't end in abandoned shacks or charity auctions. They were pulled into the secret laboratories of military ambition. In the early 1950s, as Cold War fears consumed Washington, Pentagon research groups began classifying certain human test subjects as non-citizen biological assets. Among these were severely inbred women taken from psychiatric hospitals in Kentucky, Texas, and Montana. These women were hidden from census records, their birth names replaced with alphanumeric codes. They were told they were being transferred to advanced medical care. In reality, they were trucked to underground facilities beneath Fort Detrick and Dugway Proving Ground. There, military doctors studied their malformed lungs, doubled organs, and fused bone structures. Why? Because Pentagon geneticists theorized that extreme inbreeding produced rare mutations that could survive radiation exposure, biological warfare agents, and starvation conditions. One woman, codenamed Delta V13, had a partial second spine fused to her pelvis. Another, Theta X02, possessed lung tissue density nearly double that of a normal human, an anomaly caused by generations of father-daughter incest. Military notes record attempts to impregnate these women, using both donor semen and radiation-altered cells to study birth defect amplification. Most of these pregnancies terminated within weeks, their remains disposed in biohazard incinerators. One child survived birth, lived 3 hours, and died convulsing under 24-hour observation lamps. They were not testing cures, they were testing human limits, searching for bodies they believed could endure nuclear fallout after a Third World War. This is what hidden power does when it sees human life as disposable. It takes the most vulnerable, women born from incestuous chains they never chose, and turns them into lab animals to perfect weapons no nation should wield. No graves mark these women's sacrifice. Their names never appear in textbooks. Their mothers, sisters, and children never learned where they died. Only fragments remain in declassified files marked unfit for public release. In the next and final section, we descend to the ultimate truth, why incest was not just a byproduct of isolation or poverty, but a deliberate tool of social control, and how modern elites continue its psychological legacy today. Now that you know the horrors hidden in isolated shacks, orphan auctions, and military laboratories, understand this final truth. Incest was never just an accident of poverty or ignorance. In medieval Europe, royal families deliberately married cousins, siblings, even uncles to nieces to keep power consolidated. But in America, incest became a tool not for elite purity, but for elite control over the poor. How? When you trap a family in generational inbreeding, you destroy their genetic vitality, their physical strength, their cognitive power. You create a lineage less able to resist, rebel, or rise. That is the dark secret of Appalachian settlements deliberately left unconnected by roads, of native reservations left underfunded for schools and forced into intra-tribal marriages to survive, of cult compounds where children born from incest were branded divine gifts while leaders wielded absolute power. It is psychological warfare embedded in flesh and bone. And here is the deeper revelation. This mindset never disappeared. Today, modern elites do not force incest physically. They do it psychologically. They create digital echo chambers, cultural silos, and algorithmic prisons that breed intellectual incest, where you are exposed only to what your group already believes, where your ideas marry each other in closed loops, never mixing with disruptive truth, never evolving. Just as physical inbreeding deforms the body, psychological inbreeding deforms the mind, creating generations unable to think critically, unable to imagine freedom, and too weak to break the system. But now you stand apart. You have heard the hidden stories of America's most inbred women. You have felt their suffering, their stolen dignity, and the unmarked graves that keep their names silent forever. Their lives are warnings carved in bloodlines. Do not let your mind become their mirror. If you are truly ready to break this psychological inbreeding, comment below, "I awaken from the blood veil," write it twice. Because the world is ruled by those who keep you chained in knowledge incest, feeding you the same recycled truths while they devour what is real. And until you rip the mask from their faces, you will remain exactly where they want you. Blind, weak, obedient. But today, something inside you has broken free. The choice is now yours.